starting with Mr. Bossio.
Thank you all for being here this morning, and thank you for cutting your presentations shorter so that we have the opportunity to ask these questions. My questions are primarily for Mr. Jones. According to the data, are emissions increasing?
So emissions, the emissions data are available. They're reported. Our inventory is available every year. Emissions have fluctuated over the last several years. I believe the auditor's report does have a line graph. In the absence of policy, they are projected to increase going forward, but with policy, as you'll see in the auditor's report, in the commissioner's report, with our new policies, they're projected to decrease quite significantly.
And the last data we have though on emissions is 2015.
That's right. That's right. There's typically a 2-year lag on emissions inventory information.
And according to the data, is climate change happening? Is it a reality?
According to the data, is climate change happening? I think the fact that climate change is happening is unequivocal, and the leading scientists of the world have stated that climate change is happening unequivocally and is unequivocally caused by human action. So I don't think there's any debate on that point.
Would you agree that there's no silver bullet to solving the climate change dilemma?
Absolutely. I think the way that we've approached the development of our policies, we've tried to look at it from all angles, and I think we've certainly concluded that there is no silver bullet. Had there been one, we would have one policy rather than a suite of policies. And there are so many different sources of emissions that different policy tools are perhaps better suited to get at different sources. So we've attempted to take a holistic approach.
Exactly. And I guess looking at the approach that we're taking through Pan-Canadian framework, you listed a lot of them, $20 billion into urban public transit, $21 billion into green infrastructure, $2.2 billion into clean technology, $2 billion into a low carbon economy fund, $2 billion into disaster mitigation adaptation, $260 million over 5 years to implement the Pan-Canadian framework commitments. This is a very multifaceted, broad plan that is working with the different levels of government to achieve this very large goal of reducing our climate change mitigation. Would you agree that that is a serious plan that wants to tackle this issue by 2030?
Yes, I think this is the most comprehensive plan, and I think a number of commentators, whether it's on the environmental group side or on industry or elsewhere, have referred to this as the most comprehensive plan that we've had to date in Canada. In addition to the funds that you mentioned, it's probably worth noting that, of course, in addition to carbon pricing, which gets most of the attention, there are a suite of regulatory measures as well that on both the electricity sector, the oil and gas sector, and elsewhere that have the potential to achieve significant reductions.
Thank you. Actually, I meant to add those as well, and there's so many, right, that we're working with. Now, would you also agree, though, that this is implemented? The Pan-Canadian framework really came into effect 9 months ago. Is that a reasonable period of time to expect that we'd see dramatic reductions in carbon emissions or an impact on the climate plan?
Well, no, frankly. It takes time to implement these policies. Regulations need to be drafted and gazetted. There's a legislated process there with specific timelines, and certainly a commitment to rigor in how we design and implement our regulations. There's a financial management system, of course, in place for federal funds, so it took time for Treasury Board submissions to be made and for those funds to be released. In fact, we were being audited on progress before we had the funds released to implement many of the policies and programs that are embedded in the Pan-Canadian framework. So we're quite focused on implementation now, but we're just getting going.
Now, the Commissioner, when I'd asked her that same question, I said, what would be a reasonable time frame that you would expect to see whether this plan is working or not, had given a number of approximately 3 years. This is something they're struggling with as well to try to figure out, okay, what is it? What would you say is a reasonable time frame before we could realistically say, okay, yeah, this plan is working, we can start to see the acceleration of the carbon reductions and moving towards meeting our targets?
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer just because you will see emission reductions being achieved by different measures at a different pace. So there's a specific time frame associated with carbon pricing, but that will take time to step up. On other measures like building codes, enhanced building codes, for example, I think are particularly important for driving deep reductions in the longer term, but will take time to be developed, implemented, and then have an effect on the building stock as the building stock does not turn over quickly. So our emission projections are laid out in the commissioner's report, and I think you'll see an ever increasing steepness of that line. But we're working extremely hard now to implement policies as fast as humanly possible, and that's our exclusive focus. In fact, my group that was involved in developing the Pan-Canadian Framework has been morphed into a new organization called the Pan-Canadian Framework Implementation Office. So this is to focus exclusively on the task of working with colleagues across many departments and agencies to oversee the implementation of all of these many policies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fast.